Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and happy Hanukkah! I am so excited that Hanukkah is finally here, and welcome to the first night of the 2020 ChemKnits Hanukkah special. Every night after sundown, in the Eastern time zone at least, I will be releasing a new yarn dyeing video as a gift from me to all of you. And some of you might have samplers at home that correspond to each night, so you can unwrap a little 10-gram mini skein that corresponds with the dyeing video, and it's so much fun. Don't worry, the fun won't stop after 8 nights. There'll probably be a vlog, maybe some bonus videos along the way, but we're gonna bring a lot of light and laughter into this Hanukkah season. Tonight's video actually starts in a little bit of an interesting way. I want to explore some pastels, thinking about opals and other light variegated washes of color. And that's what we're gonna do. Technically, the dye we're about to use is leftover from another project I was dyeing, but we want hints of color, so it makes sense, and these were the colors I wanted to use for this project, so it all sort of blended together naturally with the projects I was working on today. So now, let's go take a look at what my situation on the dye counter is.
Today's video is actually starting a little out of order. Since I want to make pastel colors with some of these fluorescent acid dyes, I have already aliquoted the 6 colors we're going to use. And I'll give you a close-up in a moment, but we're starting off with a yarn mop because I use these dyes for a separate speckling project, and then now I want to dissolve them in some water. The goal is pastels, and I'm not measuring the amount of dye because we just want a little bit and we're going to go by feel. And so I figured, well, I have a little bit of color to clean up from that other project, so why not make our first Leave No Dye Behind skein of Hanukkah 2020.
I took these fluorescent colors that I had aliquoted before and then dissolve them into some warm tap water. Not worrying about the proportions a ton. Since we're going for pastels, we will be diluting these really heavily. But we wanted a good starting place for each of the colors. The 6 colors that we are using are Dharma Fluorescent Fuschia, Fluorescent Safety Orange, Fluorescent Lemon, Purple Pop, which is fluorescent, Radioactive, which is fluorescent, and then for the blue, Frozen Blue, which is not a fluorescent color, but there isn't a fluorescent blue dye, but it is fairly neon and goes well with the other ones, and so that's why I picked it. I'm now going to go ahead and transfer this dye into some small squeeze bottles. They aren't going to be specific colors, but we will try to use up all of this dye today with our pastels, and then, you know, I think we'll have some extra Leave No Dye Behind skeins as well. So we have a few pastel colors out here, and then we've got what is in our bottles. And I thought, just for fun, let's take a look at the potency of those stocks. Now this wiped up spills along the way, but here's another one. So take a little bit of each color. So purple, blue, green, yellow, orange, and pink. So these 6 colors are fairly balanced. Let me zoom in. The pigmentation in these 6 colors is similar. And it makes sense because I picked up a similar amount of each of them before, you know, in the containers originally. I had used just sort of like the tip of one of these spoons. So maybe between like a 1/4 and 1/2 teaspoon of dye. The goal is not to have something as beautiful and pigmented as this is, although I have to say I love this just as it is, and with all of these yarn mops I will go and steam set them for 20 minutes on the stove top. But the goal is to get something more opal, more pastel, shifts of just barely their color. And some of these containers that I have right here, which had just that residual dye, I added water and brought it up. I haven't added any dye back into these. Some of these, like the orange and pink, might be too pigmented still. But we can test the level of pigmentation on a mini skein before we go to the full skein to get the color where we want it to go before we get started. I already feel that we need a little bit more blue in here. I want barely their color, but I do want some color. And everything else I think might be fine. Let's set this guy aside. And honestly, I think I might want a little more yellow. There we go. And I have this one here. Wipe that off my glove. So let's take some yellow. Ooh, that's nice. That is barely there. That is what I am going for. Ooh. Let's take our pink. That is nice too. And I'm just spooning some on to get a sense of these hues. The yellow almost could be more pigmented, but I'm also okay with it not be. It doesn't need to feel like a full-on rainbow. And the thing is, since these colors aren't measured, it's going to be really, really hard to replicate it if I need to. But I know from looking at the colors, like right now I think I want more blue in here. And so understanding how the colors look in these containers will help me. And I'll zoom you back into this after we do this mini test. Yeah, so that blue is pretty good. Let's check our purple. Yeah, I think of all of these, rather than wanting the yellow more pigmented, I think I want the green less pigmented. But this overall balance is pretty close to where I want the colors to be. And as I go and add these colors onto our yarn, we still have some control over building up the color a little bit more, or maybe adding less and diluting colors more as we're adding it. So that'll give us some flexibility as we go about these colors. And just for some contrast. Now, it would be possible to start with something that is that dilute and then get something that is much, much more pigmented, depending on the volume of dye. But by having our dyes more dilute to start with, I can pour one of these cups onto the yarn. But if I had just put, a tiny squirt of one of these bottles, then we would have pigmented color and not see the more pastel. And I think I'll be fine if we end up with some, white in the yarn as well. I'm really, really excited. So let's, I guess, go set up. I am coming in to steam set these minis, and I want to, keep some of these pretty separate. I don't mind if these other two get a bit more mixed, but I will steam them for 20 to 30 minutes. Today we will be dyeing some micro skeins from Wool to Dye For. The yarn is the Platinum Sock or Platinum DK base, both of which are 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. And I have assembled 10 of these 10-gram micro skeins onto one zip tie and pre-soaked for at least 30 minutes. I'm adding the yarn wet and still fairly saturated here to the pan. We're gonna add these colors to this cool yarn with no acid in it yet, and we'll be adding a lot of volume of water with these pastel colors to get not like a perfect rainbow repeating colorway, but patches of these tones. I want the pastels to sort of mix in together a little bit and just be really soft pastel and pretty. That's the goal. Let's get started with some of this purple pop, which is actually looking pretty pink, and I'm just randomly pouring it on. There is enough color that you can see it here, but it isn't so much color that you feel that bright neon quality to it. And again, there's still not very much liquid in here, but I'm curious at how far these colors are actually penetrating pretty far. So below the first layer, we see that color continue. Depending on how much liquid we end up with in here from adding the first round of colors, we might flip it before we add acid, but we'll see as things go. Now the yellow, I think, is fairly pastel, and I'm being careful, but the goal is to actually have some of each color in all of the skeins. That is the goal. And we have 30 mini skeins in here right now. I believe we've got, I think 10 DK and 20 fingering weight. Now so far I've added all of the color that I've mixed, but that isn't absolutely necessary. We could go through and do less. Like I'm gonna do a little bit less, I think, of some of this orange. And the results are slightly different because we have micro skeins, these 10-gram mini skeins here, versus having, if we were dyeing full skeins of yarn, because the 10-gram, these 10-gram micros don't have that much yardage in them, so therefore there's only that much sort of random, less repeating variation that you can get in each of these colors. But we're layering things, and I'm really excited to see what these will start to look like on the other side. But I love what's happening. This is so pastel. Let's just, I don't want to press, ooh, that's cool. All right, I think we're not gonna end up needing to add a ton of color to the other side, but I will probably want to end up adding some. I'm now going just very light, and maybe the green is one I will do light on the other side as well. I don't mind if we have some white left behind, but I wanted these colors to really blend and shift together a bit. Yeah, I am happy, and I think that I might do the same with our pink and just be very light and a little intentional. The pink from the Purple Pop is very pigmented. So there's that. But I'm curious, you know, how this will all look. And I'm really, really liking what is happening. It is so soft. And pastels are not something I do very often, and especially not random colors like this. Okay, so we've done most of the yellow, the blue, and the purple actually. A little bit of orange, a tiny bit of green, and a little bit of pink. We're gonna do something right now that people often ask me about, and is not something that I've done very much at all. I am now spraying some vinegar on here to get some even coverage. And I believe it's just straight vinegar that I have in here. Maybe it's diluted a tiny bit. But we just gave some coverage all around, and when I come back, we'll start heating things up. Our water level is really low, but if I press on it, there is some water. Actually, I wonder how much colors have already started to strike. But I am gonna turn on the heat on high for just like a few minutes. There's one little rogue speckle in there. And by minutes, I just mean like briefly, and then I'm going to reduce it until we get steamy. So this is a lot lower than I typically do anything, and we do not want to burn our yarn. One thing to keep in mind as I stand here and babysit the yarn is that when you are dyeing colors, they will always look more pigmented when wet than they will on dry. And this is even more extreme for certain, I guess, other situations. But we are starting to heat up, and we've got reasonable color coverage towards the back. I don't want to blend everything we've done so far, but I like where things are headed. And so right now I am moving and shifting the yarn a bit because there's just like a difference in heat and stuff through here. And okay, let's reduce to low. And I'm gonna pop the gloves back on and we can start adding some color to the other side. Because there's not a lot of pigment in here. I don't see a lot of pigment in the water, so we may as well flip and start adding things. There's not a lot of space for the colors to spread out a ton. And so while we did have some color come through, there's definitely going to be more color that we will want to add. And specifically, I can tell already that I'm going to want some blue. But I'll start with some of this pink that we didn't use before. Because it's okay if the colors on the back side are a bit different than what they were on the front. We are layering these pastels in this really fun way. I do think I want to be a little careful with the orange, but in some places over the pink. I know a lot of people don't really like orange, and I'll be honest, it's not my favorite color either, but it grows on me a bit. The green, I just think, ended up being more pigmented than some of these other colors, which is why I'm just sort of dashing it on. But I want more blue and yellow for sure. So I'm going to go and mix those up, just real dilute. Here's the new blue. I did about 3 squirts of it, and I am actually pretty happy. So we're going and splashing this on. It's funny, things definitely feel more pigmented than I think what I initially had envisioned, but I'm not upset about it. Well, I guess it's good that I'm not upset about it, but I like this rainbow cotton candy feel we have going on. I just don't want things to get too muddied, but we've got gorgeous shifts. The yellow could be a little more pigmented, but I can't tell if I'm missing that purple. I think I'll add a little more just in case. Purple Pop is a really fun color. It breaks super easily. And I think I mixed this a little pigmented, but I'm going in and I can use the liquid in here to help sort of spread things back out. But my goal right now is to add like a bit of different tone into some of these pink segments. And we'll probably move the yarn one more time, but I am pretty happy. Maybe I want to bring in a bit more of this blue in some areas, but I just wanted really soft shifts of color, and I think that we have achieved that. All right, I'm gonna come and spray again with this vinegar mixture. And I will say doing this makes everything smell super vinegary. And now the heat was on low, I'm gonna turn it up so we can actually have things start to really properly set in here. I have a feeling that if I were to move this, I wouldn't see a ton of spread of color. And yeah, it's fairly lukewarm right now, mainly because we have been almost constantly adding more volume. And so the volume that we have in here right now is is, you know, it's still lowish immersion, but there's definitely a lot more volume in here, so I'm a lot less nervous when it comes to heating the pan. But this is one reason why we didn't start out adding a lot of water volume to the pan at the beginning, because I knew that to get these pastel colors to have a good spread on our yarn, that I wanted to add a lot more volume of dye. A lot of times we add the dye more concentrated because we want the colors to pop more, have more variation. But this, oh gosh, what's that ice cream? It's like a sherbet, rainbow sherbet or something maybe, but the colors aren't quite bright enough, so I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna let this sit for 15 minutes and then we'll come and check back in. Let's check. Oh, and I was wrong before. I think I've got 20 DK and then 10 fingering, but oh, that's pretty good. I'm just sort of opening up to the middle. I might break up some of this interior, but I love this just hint. Oof. Oh, this one is great. Okay, yeah, I think I just want a tiny bit more something in here, but I don't want it that stark. So as I come in, you can sort of help blend things out a tad. But I am happy, and I'm just adding a little bit of blue in there, and I think we're good. I don't think it needs much more. Man, having this much restraint is really hard. And the thing that is also really, really funny, well, you'll see. I'll go show you the leftover dye, but I'm gonna let this heat for I think 10 more minutes, and then I'll turn off the heat, wait for it to cool so we can wash it. Like, I'm not worried, like, these colors are setting great. We've dyed 300 grams of yarn right now. This is the dye that was mixed. Granted, we had leftover powder, but I could probably dye 100 skeins with this amount of color. I mean, I haven't done the math, but yeah, maybe not 100, but I could dye a lot because there's so little actual dye on here. And we were able to spread it out so far using a lot of volume of these other colors. And so we might see differences between the 3 sets, or at the end I might not be able to tell the difference between the different dye lots. But we will go ahead and dye 600 more grams in this colorway, and then I don't know if I'll leave this dye behind for another video or do some more for this night. That we will see. This isn't for Chanukah, but I just thought I would show the beauty that I was dyeing with those powders that we started with at the beginning. Going through the next rounds, mostly off camera, but I noticed that I was adding a lot less total volume, even while getting a similar spread of color. The colors are still going through nicely to the other side. So this is something to just keep in mind as you are dealing with something that has such a low level of water. So I'll probably spray on the vinegar and let it sit a little bit before maybe adding a little bit more volume of water to heat it up. With most of the dyeing done, there are some residual pastels that we have mixed, and we've got some extra little mini skeins that we may as well leave no dye behind. Since these are twisted, I am not entirely sure what kind of patterning we might see or get with this larger volume, but I'm excited. Let's add one more to the pink. This one had some little bits of other color on there as well. This is just a little fun. And I'll add, I need a little bit more vinegar for that last one. I think there's still some in my spray bottle. There we go. And I'm gonna let this color soak up a little bit, and then maybe, well, we'll leave them for a bit and then see what happens. As for the rest of this dye, I'm going to set it aside. I think it might come in handy for some other nights of Chanukah or some other projects I have in mind. But I will cap all of these bottles. Let's wash our pretty pastel yarn, which doesn't shift colors like an opal in the way you look at it, because those colors are fairly constant. But we've got these layered pastel colors that I think it's fun. I think it's really fun. It's hard to not like go overboard when going for a pastel. It's not something that I consider a strength. I'm now going to add a little bit of some clear dish soap. I like to do this as both a bleeding test and to clean the yarn, but I am really not expecting any bleeding here. Nope. So I will rinse out the soap, hang it up to dry, and I'll do the same with the other skeins that I still have over on the stove. These are done, but it's still hard for me to tell if they're more pigmented than that first round I did. But anyway, as soon as they cool, I will wash these as well. And we have some other minis, like yarn mops soaking, but I did want to open this one up. It has already been steam set, but I was curious, ooh, cool, how this would look. That is really, really fun. I will show these at the end. And this is our more pastel one. I'm curious if the coverage is deeper. Yeah, the coverage, there's maybe some white. That's really cool too. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and wash these off camera. I'm not expecting any bleeding. But of course, I will pop back in if I do see some. We've got some acid in here, and I'm actually gonna just pop lids on these containers and stick them outside for a couple of days to help this color set. It's possible I might need more vinegar, but you know, we'll see. It's an easy way to set things aside. These last few yarn mops have been outside for a couple of days. I am going to steam set them, wash and dry, but that water is completely clear. Let's go ahead. Oh yeah, we're gonna have some variation in there. Let's check our green. Nice, some subtle resist. The yellow, yep, I think we'll have some resist in the yellow as well. So anyway, into the steamer basket, these guys go. Into the steamer basket, these guys go. And I'll pop back in to show what the dry yarn looks like in the conclusions. There is so much of this finished dry pastel yarn. But let's take a closer look at some of these yarn mops we created before we look at the actual cotton candy type yarn. I love the brightness in, this was that twisted skein where I tested the colors at the strength they had them. I mean, the one where I was wiping up the spills and wiping off the pan, those are so fun as well. But something about just seeing the dyes at full strength and this patterning makes me really excited. This skein was also twisted, and this is the one where I tested out our pastel colors. It's a much more regular repeating pattern, and I feel like, well, there we go. I feel like because of the way it was twisted and doubled over there, you don't get a good sense of the orange. The orange sort of has disappeared. The green stands out. The pink and purple look very, very similar. So I think the only thing that's going to make this Leave No Dye Behind stand out from the rest of these pastel skeins is that it has that more regular repeat, whereas the other ones don't. And these color sections are much wider and there's a lot more like shift and hues in here. The other Leave No Dye Behind minis are currently steaming, but now, through editing magic, let's take a look at them. Here are the last few yarn mops. The modeling we got from the twisted minis is most apparent here in the pink, where you can really see that light and dark. I see it also with the yellow and with the green. Now the green I think had some frozen in it, but did this have some orange in it too? I don't know. Both of these colors feel so muted and so unfrozen fluorescent that it is really, really interesting to me. But nevertheless, these are beautiful. And with the exception of this one, which had some purple pop that I wiped up on it, they are very subtle, more muted pastel tonal yarn. And it's just really fun that you can create something so subtle and muted from these neon colors. Each individual set of 10 is still connected, but I don't have these arranged into the sets that I had in each pan. And there's definitely some differences. Like this one, which definitely came from one of the later batches, has a lot more green. And this one has some more quiet, undulating colors. I'm not sure if I say opal, if you really feel that. Maybe I wish that we had something with some glimmer, so then you could feel a little bit of that shimmer from opal. Oh gosh, especially if we had some iridescent Angelina in the yarn. That would be perfect. But you can't really find barrier bases with Angelina in them. But I'm still really happy with the color. However, something about when I was hanging these up to dry and saw how a lot of the blues really feel quiet. I'm actually now seeing them on camera, but some of the other skeins, the blues just feel more hidden, and maybe the blue is present, but I feel more of the yellow, the orange, and the green, and a little bit of the pink when looking at this yarn. But it gave me deja vu, and I wonder, have I dyed this colorway before? And clearly I haven't. I don't think I've ever used like pastels from these neon colors in this way. But I feel like I've tried to go for a breath of color and had a similar feeling of a color disappearing. I know in one of the ChemKnits dye-alongs, there was one where I added purple, and then when it dried, the purple wasn't present anymore. But something, and I cannot for the life of me think of what video it is, but something feels very familiar, like I've done it before. So, sleuths, have I done this colorway before? Please let me know down below. Here are just 2 of the sets of 10. And the differences are super subtle because these are so pastel. But in person, this one feels very green and pink and yellow with maybe a hint of orange. And these feel more rainbow. So maybe now that I've pointed it out, you can sort of see that. But either way, this shows what I always like to say, that, you know, different dye lots can look different. Now, even some skeins within this dye lot look different. The top one has a lot more green than the bottom, just based on where the colors were added in the pan. And so something like that can happen with this technique. But I am so happy with the coverage we got. I know I said that with this technique I was going to be fine if we had some white left behind, but these colors went through the yarn beautifully and didn't all blend together, stayed separate. We added that acid and they struck, and it's always awesome when something is in my head and it just works. And so I'm thrilled. I am always saying that I need to work more with pastels and trying to create pastels intentionally versus as a leave no dye behind. Now, granted, there was a leave no dye behind element here and that powders were all left over, but the intent for this video was to go for pastels, and I did these projects on the same day, knowing that then I could have that leftover neon color to try for this project. So technically, I was using leftover dye, but I intentionally had leftover dye so I could do this project. This type of variegated technique, whether it comes to adding acid by pouring or spraying it on like we did here, which I know there have been a lot of requests for me to spray on acid, so I'm so glad I finally did that. I think that this technique of starting cool with no acid and applying the colors with large volumes of water works so well, especially if the color placement can be a little random. If you want slightly more control over that color placement, maybe you might want to do something different, but these colors really did penetrate, and so having that volume there helped us get more coverage. If we had less volume, then we might have seen tinier patches of the color. So I'm just thrilled. Off camera, I'm gonna go wrap up the rest of these minis, and oh man, I hope you guys are really enjoying Hanukkah night 1. Tonight is just the beginning. We have so much fun and color planned for Hanukkah 2020. So make sure you are subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and have your notifications turned on so you don't miss any of it. Every night of Hanukkah at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, there will be a new video, and I will be attempting to join the live chat room at the premiere as often as I can, so that way I can answer questions and react to the videos with all of you, which is a lot of fun. If you missed a night, you can find all of the videos as they become available in the ChemKnits Chanukah playlist, which I will have linked down below in the description. In addition to these Hanukkah special episodes, I publish 2 videos every week on Tuesday and Friday mornings, and that will still be happening through Hanukkah and the rest of the year. And so we're gonna have so much fun with color and yarn. Oh, December is gonna be amazing. Tonight, we dyed a pastel opalescent rainbow yarn. What's gonna happen tomorrow? Stay tuned, because I cannot wait for you to see what happens. Thank you so much for watching.